In the quiet town of Montreville, 1872, a single evening would etch itself into history as one of the most disturbing and mysterious events the region had ever witnessed. A recipe, passed down through whispers and guarded with a secrecy that bordered on obsession, promised flavors so exquisite that the curiosity of any cook could not resist. Yet behind its allure lay something far more sinister, ingredients that were never meant to touch human lips. Over generations, tales grew. Some claimed the recipe was cursed. Others insisted it contained rare poisonous substances. And a few skeptics dismissed the stories as the collective imagination of a frightened town. Still, the events of that one night proved that whatever its origin, this recipe would forever blur the lines between culinary mastery and tragedy. On that fateful evening, the Montreville family, a lineage known for their culinary skill, attempted to prepare the dish, unaware that their actions would unleash consequences no one could anticipate. Witnesses recalled sounds that defied reason, laughter that twisted unnervingly into cries, shadows dancing independently from any human form, and the sudden, inexplicable extinguishing of lights in every corner of the house. Hours later, investigators found the home in ruin, charred remnants of food, scorched furniture, and scattered pages of journals written in trembling, erratic handwriting. Only fragments of the family remained, leaving a haunting emptiness where life had once thrived. Experts of the era debated endlessly. Was this a case of deliberate poisoning, a grotesque experiment gone wrong, or a ritual so dark it tapped into forces beyond human understanding? Psychologists argued that extreme stress and obsession could warp perception, driving even the most rational mind to acts of unimaginable destruction. Others leaned toward supernatural explanations. A curse that demanded a sacrifice, a shadowy presence that exacted vengeance, or perhaps the very ingredients themselves carried malevolent energy, invisible to the eye but lethal to the body. Each theory, however, failed to fully account for the eerie testimonies and inexplicable evidence left behind. What makes this story so compelling, and so terrifying, is the intersection of human curiosity and hubris. The Montreville recipe was not merely a set of instructions. It was a test of ambition, an invitation to defy limits, and a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of desire. As we explore the events that night, you will encounter chilling accounts of those who dared approach the unknown, witness the unraveling of ordinary minds under extraordinary circumstances, and confront the uncomfortable question: are some secrets too dangerous for the human mind, or does innate curiosity make them irresistible? This is a story of forbidden knowledge, blurred morality, and the fragility of human reason when faced with temptation. It is a tale that lingers, echoing through time, inviting each listener to ask themselves, if presented with such a recipe, would you risk everything for the taste of the forbidden? The origins of what would later be known as the Montreville curse are shrouded in the fog of time, secrecy, and deliberate obfuscation. The story begins far from the quiet streets of 19th-century Montreville, in a remote monastery nestled deep within the rolling hills of eastern France. Here, isolated from prying eyes and the governance of both church and state, a sect of monks devoted themselves to the pursuit of knowledge, alchemical, botanical, and mystical. Among them, one figure stands out in fragmentary records: Father Alaric, a monk whose curiosity bordered on obsession, whose experiments in blending herbs, powders, and esoteric rituals would lay the foundation for a recipe that would haunt generations. Alaric's notebooks, partially preserved in fragments, hint at a dual purpose: healing and transcendence. They describe mixtures that could restore vitality, sharpen the mind, and even elevate the soul. Yet warnings scrawled in the margins speak of unpredictable side effects, fits of madness, hallucinations, or sudden death. Historians have long debated whether Father Alaric intended to create a miracle or merely sought to test the boundaries of human resilience. Some argue his early concoctions were strictly medicinal, designed to treat illnesses that conventional methods could not. Others posit a darker theory, that the recipe was an intentional experiment in mind-altering substances, a controlled attempt to manipulate perception, consciousness, and morality. The ingredients themselves, referenced cryptically as roots of nightshade, ashes of sacred fire, and powdered moonflower, have fueled centuries of speculation. Chemical analyses in modern times suggest that several of these elements are indeed toxic, if combined incorrectly, lending credibility to claims of early poisonings. Yet, without complete records, certainty remains impossible. Oral histories passed down through villages in the region add layers of complexity, blending fact and folklore. Accounts tell of travelers who fell ill after tasting a similar preparation, livestock that died suddenly after grazing near fields where the herbs were grown, and monks themselves succumbing to mysterious ailments. These events, when taken together, paint a picture of a recipe that could not be entirely controlled, a creation teetering on the knife's edge between life and death. While scientific analysis might attribute these occurrences to natural toxins, contamination, or coincidence, the people of eastern France imbued the story with moral and supernatural significance. They whispered of divine retribution, of infernal influence, and of knowledge that was never meant for human hands. The dual nature of the recipe became central to its mythology. Depending on the intent and skill of the preparer, it could nourish or destroy. The monk's journals suggest that even the most meticulous adherence to instructions could produce divergent outcomes, hinting at factors beyond mere measurement, perhaps a psychological component, or a metaphysical one that intertwined with belief, ritual, and intention. This duality captured the imagination of locals and later historians, framing the recipe as both a symbol of human ingenuity and a warning of overreach. In a society steeped in religious morality, the potential to create life or death in a single meal was terrifying and seductive in equal measure. By the mid-18th century, the recipe had migrated beyond the monastery. It passed into private hands, often through theft or surreptitious copying of the alchemical texts. These versions were less refined, lacking the precise rituals and incantations Father Alaric had emphasized. Local accounts from this period detail sporadic tragedies, families disappearing overnight, sudden illnesses that baffled physicians, and inexplicable deaths of young children and livestock. In Montreville itself, some families refused to speak of the dish at all, treating its preparation as sacrilege. Scholars studying these events note a pattern. The disasters were not uniform. Sometimes nothing happened, sometimes calamity struck. This inconsistency further fueled the perception that the recipe carried a supernatural component, that it responded not just to ingredients, but to the moral and psychological state of the preparer. Psychologists and historians alike have attempted to interpret these events. Some argue that the early recipe was, in effect, an experiment in applied psychology, a study of human susceptibility to toxins, perception, and expectation. Those who believed in the recipe's mystical properties might have unwittingly influenced the outcomes, falling victim to psychosomatic effects intensified by fear and ritual. Others maintain that there were deliberate physical causes for the tragedies, improperly prepared herbs, hidden poisons, or naturally toxic compounds. Yet the human fascination with mystery, danger, and forbidden knowledge cannot be understated. Generations who attempted to recreate Father Alaric's recipe often approached it with a mix of awe, dread, and intellectual ambition, illustrating a timeless tension between curiosity and caution. Montreville, decades later, would bear the scars of these historical whispers. Locals reported eerie occurrences long before the infamous 1872 incident. Sudden deaths of livestock, neighbors falling ill without explanation, and families that vanished overnight. Folklore intertwined with observation, creating a tapestry in which superstition and reality were inseparable. Scholars debate whether these accounts represent genuine phenomena, exaggerated oral history, or simple coincidence. What is undeniable, however, is the cultural imprint the recipe left. It became a symbol of forbidden knowledge, a cautionary tale whispered by mothers to children, a story repeated in hushed tones at taverns, and a challenge to anyone daring enough to test the boundaries of human experience. The allure of the recipe lay not only in its potential for power, but in the psychological thrill it provoked. Those who approached it understood, consciously or not, that they were engaging with something dangerous, something that demanded respect and cunning. The intersection of science, superstition, and moral ambiguity made the recipe both irresistible and terrifying. Those who sought to recreate it faced a paradox. The closer they came to mastering it, the greater the risk of catastrophe. In this sense, the recipe became more than a culinary instruction. It was a test of intellect, courage, and moral judgment. By the time it reached Montreville in the 19th century, centuries of layered myth, incomplete records, and psychological terror had transformed Father Alaric's creation into a true curse in the popular imagination. No longer just a recipe, it was a symbol of humanity's drive to explore forbidden knowledge, the precarious balance between genius and hubris, and the unknowable consequences of meddling with forces beyond comprehension. Scholars, psychologists, and folklorists continue to debate its origins. its mechanics, and its moral implications. Yet the Montreville curse persists, a chilling testament to what happens when human curiosity outpaces caution. The earliest documented tragedies linked to the Montreville curse date back to 1723, in a time when superstition and dearly science coexisted uneasily. In a small village near the Rhone River, the Lemaire family, farmers of modest means but remarkable curiosity, obtained a handwritten copy of what they believed to be a medicinal recipe originating from the distant monastery of Father Alaric. The document was crude, filled with cryptic notations, smudged symbols, and vague instructions that promised miraculous results if followed precisely. Driven by a desire to improve their meager living conditions, to heal sick children, or perhaps to attain some form of prestige in the eyes of their neighbors, the family embarked on an experiment that would end in horror. Within hours of preparing and consuming the concoction, the Lemaire family exhibited signs that contemporary witnesses could scarcely comprehend. Accounts from villagers describe the scene as nightmarish. Fathers and mothers of the village rushed to the Lemaire home, responding to frantic cries, only to find the family in various states of distress. Some had collapsed to the floor in convulsions. Others were clutching their heads, screaming of shadows, unseen figures, and colors that did not exist in the natural world. Those who attempted to approach the victims recoiled, reporting a pungent smell that hung in the air. A mixture of sulfur, burnt herbs, and spices, so thick it seemed almost tangible. One neighbor, a local miller named Henri Dubois, later recounted in his diary, "The children's faces were not their own. The eyes spoke of something beyond fear, something dark, unformed, as though their souls had glimpsed the void." These descriptions, preserved in fragments and passed down through local oral history, highlight the incomprehensibility of the events to those who witnessed them. Historians and forensic analysts today attempt to interpret these events with a combination of skepticism and fascination. Some attribute the deaths to early chemical reactions, combinations of toxic herbs and improperly stored ingredients, creating poisonous gases or lethal compounds. Others propose that the family may have consumed hallucinogenic or neurotoxic substances unknown to the era, which induced both physical collapse and terrifying psychological experiences. Yet the precise effects cannot be determined, as no physical evidence survived beyond the decayed remains noted in the parish records and the hastily burned kitchen implements. This lack of tangible proof allowed myth to flourish, as the line between natural tragedy and supernatural retribution blurred. Adding to the enigma were the diaries left behind by members of the Lemaire family. These documents, partially legible, are filled with cryptic warnings, fragmented recipes, and frantic annotations of visions and voices heard during the preparation of the recipe. Passages describe conversations with unseen entities, the sensation of being watched by invisible eyes, and fleeting glimpses of shapes that seem to move independently within the kitchen. Scholars examining these journals note that the entries suggest a complex interplay between physical symptoms, psychological stress, and cultural expectations of the mystical. The family, immersed in a world where divine punishment and witchcraft were considered plausible explanations for misfortune, may have unconsciously amplified their own suffering through fear, expectation, and anticipation. Witness testimonies from 18th-century villagers add a further layer of intrigue. Individuals spoke of hallucinations and violent reactions among the Lemaire family, including sudden outbursts, self-harm, and frenzied gestures as if trying to ward off unseen forces. Some describe faces contorted beyond recognition, voices rising and falling in patterns that resembled incantations, and even the perception that shadows themselves had gained sentience. Modern psychologists suggest that such phenomena could represent a form of mass psychogenic illness, in which fear, stress, and collective expectation create real physiological and psychological symptoms. Yet the detailed accounts remain chilling, leaving room for speculation that something beyond ordinary science was at work. Debates among contemporary historians focus on the broader implications of the tragedy. Was the Lemaire family a cautionary tale of human curiosity run amok? Or did their deaths mark the first observable effect of a recipe inherently capable of triggering catastrophic consequences? In exploring these questions, it becomes clear that human fascination with forbidden knowledge, particularly when it promises power, health, or transcendence, often overrides caution. In this instance, the combination of greed, ambition, and naivety had immediate lethal results. Moreover, the tragedy serves as a historical lens through which we can examine the intersection of science, superstition, and morality. It poses enduring questions. How much of human suffering is the result of ignorance, and how much is a consequence of curiosity that seeks to exceed the limits of understanding? The ripple effects of the first tragedy were felt far beyond the Lemaire household. Neighboring families reported strange phenomena in the days following the deaths: unexplained illnesses, sudden livestock deaths, and disturbing sounds at night. These accounts, though often dismissed as hysteria or coincidence, contributed to the growing legend of the recipe. Fear and fascination intertwined, as villagers debated whether the preparation of the dish was a deliberate act of divine punishment or simply an unfortunate accident caused by ignorance of potent herbs. The ambiguity only intensified the recipe's allure for those daring or foolish enough to experiment further. Psychologically, the Lemaire tragedy illustrates the duality of human response to danger. On one hand, there is the rational mind, attempting to interpret toxicology and chemical causation. On the other, the deeply ingrained belief in mystical consequences and divine retribution. This tension persists in modern interpretations, as scholars, chemists, and psychologists continue to argue over whether the Montraville curse originated in alchemy, human error, or some combination of both. Regardless of the ultimate cause, the event marks the first clear demonstration of the recipe's potential to combine physical lethality with profound psychological terror. The narrative of the first victims establishes a recurring theme in Montraville's history. Ordinary curiosity, once combined with forbidden knowledge, can have extraordinary, often catastrophic consequences. The Lemaire family's demise is more than a cautionary tale. It exemplifies a broader pattern seen in later generations: ambition, experimentation, and disregard for safety leading to tragedy. Every subsequent attempt to recreate the recipe would echo the same motif, blurring the line between culinary curiosity and a descent into lethal obsession. Through this lens, the Montraville curse becomes a symbol not merely of poison or superstition, but of human vulnerability to forbidden knowledge and the psychological grip of fear, anticipation, and myth. As the story unfolds, the deaths of the Lemaire family resonate across centuries, inviting endless speculation, analysis, and fear. They represent the first link in a chain of tragedies that will later culminate in the infamous events of 1872. Leaving behind questions that remain unresolved. Were these deaths purely accidental? Did their recipe possess a hidden malevolent property? Or did human psychology, fear, suggestion, and obsession amplify otherwise explainable reactions into events that could only be described as supernatural? These questions linger, ensuring that the first victims are remembered not merely for their deaths, but for the haunting, unresolved mysteries they introduced into the Montraville legend. In the decades following the initial tragedies of the Montraville recipe, scholars, chemists, and folklore enthusiasts alike struggled to reconcile what had occurred. The earliest records painted a tapestry that was both horrifying and enigmatic, leaving modern science grappling with questions that seemed simultaneously solvable and impossible. How could a simple recipe, composed ostensibly of mundane herbs and spices, provoke such extreme reactions? Was it a hidden chemical mechanism? A purely psychological contagion? Or had something beyond the known natural laws intervened? By the early 20th century, the debate intensified, as researchers attempted controlled reconstructions, each endeavor teetering between empirical inquiry and almost ritualistic dread. Dr. Lucien Moreau, a chemist and early investigator into Montraville folklore, documented his attempts in meticulous journals. He collected samples of each purported ingredient listed in surviving manuscripts, ranging from dried root extracts to obscure alpine herbs once used by monastical chemists. Through careful chemical analysis, Dr. Moreau discovered that certain compounds, if improperly processed, could indeed cause hallucinations, severe gastrointestinal distress, and even organ failure. For instance, he identified traces of tropane alkaloids in one root, substances known to induce delirium, confusion, and hyperthermia. A different blend of powdered flowers, when combined with high heat, released volatile oils that irritated the respiratory system and nervous tissue. These findings suggested that, under precise yet easily miscalculated conditions, the recipe could inflict genuine physical harm. Yet Dr. Moreau's discoveries only partially accounted for the phenomena recorded in Montraville. Villager testimonies described not only vomiting or collapse, but erratic behavior, hysterical laughter, violent outbursts, and vivid hallucinations of shadowy figures and speaking objects. Chemically, these symptoms could not be fully explained by toxicology alone. Dr. Moreau noted, even accounting for poisons, there remains an aspect of perception unquantifiable, as though the mind itself were drawn into a theater of horror beyond physiological reaction. Here, the boundaries of science met the limitations of human psychology. Was it possible that the recipe acted as a catalyst for fear, amplifying existing cognitive vulnerabilities, or were these effects purely socio-culturally constructed? Fueled by rumor, anticipation, and superstition, local legends passed orally from one generation to the next added an additional layer of complexity. According to folklore, the recipe had been blessed or cursed by an unseen spiritual presence, capable of exacting retribution for hubris or indiscretion. Villagers described eerie premonitions, kitchen shadows lengthening unnaturally, pots trembling without cause, or the faint sound of whispers and laughter during preparation. Some accounts even hinted at poltergeist-like disturbances, objects moving of their own accord, and fleeting silhouettes visible only from the corner of one's eye. These stories, though difficult to verify, contributed to an overwhelming psychological tension. The more researchers tried to explain the events with chemistry, the more persistent the supernatural claims became, creating a paradox in which belief and observation fed upon each other. Psychologists today propose a framework for understanding these reactions. Mass suggestion, fear contagion, and social conditioning can combine to produce genuine physiological and emotional responses, especially when participants are highly motivated by curiosity or expectation. In the context of Montreville, individuals aware of the recipe's feared potency were primed to experience extreme reactions, which may have been magnified by prior knowledge of past tragedies. This interplay of anticipation and perception mirrors phenomena observed in modern contexts, such as mass psychogenic illness in schools or workplaces. Individuals may manifest genuine symptoms of poisoning or distress purely through psychosocial mechanisms, a form of self-fulfilling prophecy catalyzed by shared belief. However, empirical explanations cannot fully account for some of the more sensational reports. Surviving journals from later families who experimented with the recipe describe hallucinations that seem narrative-driven, as if the mind conjured complex visions of danger and supernatural actors. These documented experiences included visions of shadowy figures, voices whispering warnings, and objects moving in ways that defy explanation. Some scholars argue these accounts are exaggerations or fabrications, the product of oral tradition and memory distortion over decades. Yet the consistency across accounts, spanning generations and independent households, challenges purely skeptical interpretations. The phenomenon sits at the intersection of cognition, culture, and chemistry, highlighting the difficulty of isolating objective fact from lived experience. The tension between rational analysis and superstition intensified when modern chemists attempted to replicate the recipe under controlled laboratory conditions. In many cases, the physical effects were mild, yet observers reported a palpable sense of unease in the laboratory itself. Dr. Sylvie Fontaine, a contemporary historian of French alchemy, noted, even when no physiological danger was present, the act of recreating the recipe seemed to provoke a subtle, persistent anxiety in all participants. The ritualistic preparation, combined with knowledge of its history, transformed a simple mixture into a psychologically charged artifact. Here, the interplay between expectation, ritual, and environment demonstrates how superstition may not merely reflect ignorance, but actively shape human perception and experience. Comparative analysis between historical victims and modern test subjects reveals a duality. On one hand, chemical reactions can explain physical symptoms, hallucinations, nausea, organ failure. On the other, superstition, fear, and anticipatory anxiety amplify the effect to almost narrative proportions. This dual causality underscores a key insight. The recipe's power is not merely in its ingredients, but in the cultural and psychological weight it carries. It is a synthesis of tangible and intangible forces, a mirror reflecting humanity's simultaneous fascination and terror of forbidden knowledge. Moreover, the Montreville case illuminates broader moral and ethical questions. Should researchers continue to experiment with dangerous knowledge simply for understanding, or are some secrets too potent, too psychologically destabilizing to be explored? The ethical implications mirror debates in other domains: nuclear physics, biological research, and psychological experimentation, where the pursuit of knowledge conflicts with human safety and well-being. The recipe's legend becomes a cautionary emblem, highlighting the human propensity to push boundaries despite clear evidence of risk. The narrative also demonstrates the role of storytelling in shaping perception. As chemical analysis and psychological interpretation advance, folklore continues to preserve the recipe's terrifying reputation. Each failed experiment reinforces the myth, feeding fascination and dread alike. Villagers, researchers, and modern enthusiasts participate in a continuum where fact and myth intertwine, creating an experiential truth that is both frightening and compelling. The psychological weight of expectation ensures that even harmless versions of the recipe may produce real distress, blurring the line between reality and legend. Ultimately, the Montreville recipe exemplifies a rare convergence of science and superstition. Chemical properties provide a plausible mechanism for physiological effects. Psychological mechanisms explain perception and reaction. Folklore imbues the entire phenomenon with cultural resonance and narrative power. Together, these factors illuminate humanity's enduring struggle with forbidden knowledge. The tension between curiosity and caution, the compulsion to explore what may be dangerous, and the moral dilemmas inherent in confronting the unknown. The recipe's legend persists because it occupies a liminal space between rational understanding and the inexplicable. It challenges investigators to reconcile empirical evidence with cultural belief, and forces audiences to confront the uncomfortable possibility that some phenomena may defy full comprehension. Each investigation, each experiment, each retelling perpetuates the narrative, ensuring the Montreville curse remains both a subject of scientific inquiry and a haunting, unresolved mystery. Scholars continue to debate whether the recipe's effects were primarily chemical, psychological, or supernatural, but the line between these explanations remains intentionally blurred. The allure lies precisely in this ambiguity, a dark, tantalizing puzzle that demands attention, yet resists solution. As the story of Montreville unfolds, the tension between science and superstition reveals deeper truths about human nature. Fear, expectation, and curiosity are powerful forces, capable of producing real, measurable effects on both body and mind. Superstition, once dismissed as ignorance, now appears as a complex lens through which individuals interpret and experience the world. The Montreville recipe in this light is more than ahistorical curiosity. It is a psychological and cultural case study, a testament to the enduring power of mystery, and a cautionary tale for all who seek knowledge without understanding the consequences. Few dared to admit having survived the Montreville recipe, and even fewer were willing to recount their experiences publicly. Those who did spoke in hushed tones, often glancing over their shoulders, as if the shadows of that fateful evening lingered just beyond perception. Each testimony was as unique as it was chilling, blending vivid sensory hallucinations with deeply personal revelations. Some survivors described seeing figures that had no physical form, shapes that moved along walls, whispering unintelligible words and vanishing when approached. The auditory hallucinations were equally disturbing: laughter, cries, and sometimes a voice mimicking someone close, urging them to do things they could not fully comprehend. Such accounts challenged conventional understanding, leaving both historians and psychologists puzzled over what constituted reality and what was a product of terror-driven imagination. Henriette Delacroix, a distant relative of the original Montreville family, offered one of the most harrowing testimonies. Her journal entries, preserved in private archives, described the immediate aftermath of consuming the recipe. "It is as though my thoughts were no longer my own," she wrote. "I saw doors where none existed, heard voices confessing secrets I had never spoken, and felt a presence pressing against my very soul." Henriette's account captures the psychological extremities experienced by survivors: a sense of dislocation, a dissolution of boundaries between self and environment, and a perception of malevolent intelligence embedded within the recipe itself. These testimonies often reveal that the recipe did not merely poison the body, but invaded the mind, amplifying latent fears, insecurities, and subconscious memories. Other survivors recounted the recipe's uncanny ability to compel honesty, as if it could pry open hidden recesses of the psyche. Marguerite Fournier, another witness, claimed that during her experience she confessed sins she had long buried, admitting to petty cruelties and unspoken resentments toward family members. "I could feel my mind betraying itself," she said in an interview decades later, her voice still trembling. "Secrets I had locked away rose to the surface, spilling into reality as if the recipe demanded them. These confessions, whether physiological, psychological, or supernatural in origin, reinforce the recipe's dual nature. A seemingly simple culinary preparation that could transform into an instrument of revelation, terror, and exposure. Not all survivors spoke in clarity. Some presented contradictory narratives, further complicating understanding. A few described intense visions of past tragedies or future calamities, while others insisted that the recipe forced them to witness acts of violence and betrayal they had no personal connection to. Such variability raises crucial questions about the mechanisms at play. Were these experiences genuine, windows into some hidden truth? Hallucinations triggered by chemical or psychological processes, or manifestations of mass suggestibility amplified by folklore and fear? Researchers attempting to study these accounts often struggled to separate fact from perception, reality from superstition, and memory from narrative reconstruction. Trauma plays a critical role in these recollections. Survivors often exhibited symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress, recurring nightmares, hypervigilance, social withdrawal, and pervasive anxiety. Many were ostracized by their communities, deemed unreliable witnesses, or accused of fabricating stories for attention. Some were institutionalized, considered psychologically unstable, while others lived in self-imposed exile, haunted by what they had seen and feared might return if they spoke too freely. In this context, survival was both a blessing and a burden. The recipe's impact persisted far beyond the initial ingestion, embedding itself into the fabric of consciousness and daily life. The human cost of experimentation with the recipe extended to families and communities. Relatives of survivors often experienced secondary trauma, witnessing personality changes, paranoia, or sudden episodes of hysteria in their loved ones. Test stories circulated in fragmented oral form, further blurring the line between legend and lived experience. Scholars examining these accounts note a pattern. The recipe amplified pre-existing fears, cultural superstitions, and psychological vulnerabilities. Its effects were not uniform but deeply personalized, shaped by each individual's history, temperament, and social environment. This variability contributes to the enduring mystery, as no single explanation accounts for all reported phenomena. Comparing eyewitness accounts with historical documentation reveals both convergence and divergence. Diaries, legal records, and medical notes corroborate certain physical symptoms, vomiting, delirium, convulsions, but fail to explain the profound mental and emotional disturbances described by survivors. In some cases, contemporary physicians dismissed patients' accounts as hysteria or delusion, unaware that the recipe's effects might transcend conventional understanding. These tensions illustrate a central dilemma. Historical evidence can record tangible outcomes, yet the subjective experiences of survivors offer insights into aspects of the phenomenon that cannot be quantified, measured, or dismissed. The recipe's psychological effects often blurred the boundaries between victim and participant. Survivors reported moments of complicit behavior, acting in ways they could not fully control, or feeling compelled to follow impulses that conflicted with moral or ethical codes. One witness described an uncontrollable urge to rearrange furniture according to an unseen pattern, believing it would prevent disaster, only to find the same compulsions returning in later decades without provocation. The intersection of coercion, autonomy, and fear illustrates the recipe's capacity to manipulate perception and behavior, raising questions about free will and accountability under extreme psychological duress. Ethical questions loom large when analyzing survivors' accounts. Should these individuals have been exposed to the recipe's effects at all? Modern psychological frameworks emphasize informed consent and risk assessment, yet historical participants were often unaware of the dangers. Their experiences highlight the human fascination with forbidden knowledge, the compulsion to test limits despite clear hazards, and the ethical responsibility of those who preserve or transmit such knowledge. The Montreville recipe in this light becomes more than a tale of horror. It is a case study in human curiosity, ethical boundaries, and the consequences of transgressing both. The layering of perception, belief, and memory is crucial in understanding these accounts. Survivors' recollections, even decades later, retain vividness and intensity. Some report sensations of being watched or followed, shadows moving independently, or objects subtly displaced, echoing phenomena commonly associated with poltergeist activity. While skeptics may attribute these to heightened vigilance, anxiety, or post-traumatic hyperarousal, the persistence and consistency of such reports across generations suggest a more complex interplay of psychology, cultural expectation, and possible environmental triggers. The recipe's legend thus endures, sustained by both lived experience and collective imagination. In examining survivors' testimonies, one observes a recurring theme. The recipe forces confrontation with one's inner darkness. Hidden fears, unacknowledged desires, and repressed memories surface, leaving participants emotionally raw. The process is simultaneously revelatory and destructive, blending horror with self-awareness. For some, survival meant grappling with guilt over perceived moral failings revealed under the recipe's influence. For others, it meant enduring social stigma or disbelief. Each account underscores the recipe's profound psychological power, a force capable of reshaping identity, perception, and memory. Moreover, survivors' narratives emphasize the ambiguity between real and imagined horrors. Some describe witnessing acts of violence or betrayal that could not be verified, while others recount experiences of genuine physical danger or illness. This duality reinforces the narrative tension. The recipe is both scientifically investigable and culturally mythologized. Its effects are physiological, psychological, and social simultaneously, creating a multidimensional phenomenon that defies singular explanation. Ultimately, survivors' accounts offer a window into the complex consequences of human curiosity, confronted with forbidden knowledge. They reveal how folklore, psychology, and lived experience intersect to create both real and perceived horrors, leaving an enduring imprint on mind and memory. The Montreville recipe, in this light, functions as a catalyst for extreme human responses, amplifying fear, perception, and cultural narrative into a single, unforgettable phenomenon. By documenting and analyzing these experiences, researchers gain insight into the fragile interplay between environment, belief, and cognition, while audiences are left to wonder, were the horrors real, imagined, or some combination that transcends conventional understanding? The voices of survivors, echoing through journals, interviews, and oral testimony, continue to haunt Montreville's history. Their experiences preserve the human cost of curiosity and the terrifying consequences of confronting unknown forces. In examining their accounts, one confronts the uncomfortable reality that survival does not equate to understanding, nor does it provide immunity from psychological and cultural ramifications. The recipe remains, in essence, a dark mirror reflecting human vulnerability, the enduring tension between fear and fascination, and the unresolved mysteries that continue to captivate those drawn to the shadowed corners of history. For centuries, the Montreville recipe has been shrouded in speculation, rumor, and folklore. Each account, each retelling, layers new interpretation onto the previous, blurring the line between historical fact and cultural myth. Scholars, both past and present, have proposed theories ranging from the purely chemical to the deeply supernatural, yet none fully encapsulates the recipe's enduring mystery. One of the most persistent hypotheses suggests that the recipe contained ingredients capable of eliciting profound physiological reactions. Alchemical records, recently unearthed from private monastic archives, hint at the use of rare herbs and metallic powders, some known to induce nausea, hallucinations, or organ distress if improperly measured. Advocates of this theory argue that the deaths and psychological disturbances were the predictable outcome of a hazardous formula, misapplied outside its original context. Yet chemical analysis alone cannot explain the anecdotal accounts of visions, voices, and premonitions, which often accompany ingestion. The physical danger, while real, seems to coexist with a layer of psychological terror that defies empirical measurement. Religious and supernatural interpretations, meanwhile, have long claimed that the recipe was more than a collection of ingredients. It was a conduit for forces beyond human comprehension. Local Montrevillians in the 18th and 19th centuries attributed each calamity to divine wrath or infernal interference, describing the recipe as cursed, ordained to punish hubris and curiosity. Priests chronicled instances where entire households reportedly succumbed to madness after preparing the dish, interpreting the events as moral lessons against defying spiritual boundaries. One manuscript, housed in the Montreville Ecclesiastical Archive, recounts a family being engulfed by flames and shadows, emphasizing that their recipe served as a test of moral integrity, a reminder that the pursuit of forbidden knowledge could provoke supernatural retribution. Such accounts often involve elaborate symbolism, mirrors reflecting hidden sins, shadows moving independently, and whispers echoing through empty rooms. These stories, repeated across generations, helped solidify the recipe's reputation as an instrument of divine or demonic judgment, amplifying fear in the local population and creating a cultural framework in which curiosity itself was deemed dangerous. Another prominent perspective frames the recipe as a psychological contagion. Observers note that fear and expectation alone could produce many reported phenomena. Eyewitnesses frequently describe sudden terror, hallucinations, or confessions emerging immediately after consuming the dish, or even after simply witnessing it being prepared. Modern psychologists suggest that social pressure, anticipation, and suggestion might have interacted with the body's natural stress response, creating a powerful psychosomatic effect. Individuals exposed to stories of the recipe's lethality could experience nausea, hallucinations, and heightened paranoia purely through expectation, reinforcing the myth while demonstrating the mind's susceptibility to narrative-driven terror. In this sense, the recipe itself may have served less as a toxic agent and more as a psychological instrument, catalyzing fear, revelation, and hysteria in equal measure. Survivors' accounts, as explored in previous sections, support this notion. The recipe amplified latent anxieties and forced confrontation with hidden aspects of the self, producing experiences that seemed supernatural or preternaturally directed. Beyond chemical, spiritual, and psychological explanations, some theorists suggest deliberate human intervention played a role. Historical records hint at possible sabotage, jealous rivals, opportunistic neighbors, or clandestine groups seeking to exploit the recipe's notoriety. In some cases, measurements or preparation techniques described in diaries and notes suggest intentional deviations from the original formula, possibly to provoke harm or panic. These theories, while speculative, underscore a recurring theme in the Montreville saga: the intersection of human malevolence with curiosity. The narrative suggests that some of the most enduring tragedies may have been orchestrated, combining human intent with the recipe's inherent unpredictability to create events that seemed fated or cursed. Cultural analysis highlights how folklore transforms historical incidents into legend. Tales of entire generations perishing in a single night, of families reduced to ashes, and of voices echoing through empty homes, reflect the human need to impose narrative order on chaos. Each retelling embellishes and interprets, layering moral lessons and symbolic meaning over factual events. These stories became cautionary tales, warning against hubris, unchecked curiosity, and the dangers of tampering with forces beyond comprehension. The recipe evolved into a narrative vessel, carrying warnings, fears, and fascination across centuries. Each generation of storytellers added nuance. Some emphasized chemical peril, others moral consequence, and still others the possibility of supernatural interference, creating a rich multidimensional mythology. The interplay of psychology and myth is particularly striking. Researchers note that the recipe's legend thrives because it speaks to universal human fears: the unknown, the uncontrollable, and the consequences of transgression. By combining tangible danger with ethereal menace, the story persists in the cultural imagination. Survivors' testimonies, historical accounts, and folklore reinforce one another, creating a feedback loop in which belief amplifies perception, and perception fuels narrative. The result is a phenomenon that resists simple classification: part history, part legend, part psychological case study. In modern analysis, the Montreville recipe functions symbolically as well as literally. It represents humanity's dual fascination with knowledge and danger, innovation and destruction. Scholars debate whether the evil resides in the recipe itself or in the human compulsion to experiment, to probe boundaries despite risk. Religious and cultural interpretations argue for moral or spiritual culpability, while scientific perspectives focus on material and chemical risk. Psychological interpretations highlight vulnerability, susceptibility, and the influence of expectation and fear. Each lens illuminates a different facet, and none provides a definitive answer, leaving the narrative unresolved. The unresolved nature of the recipe's legacy is critical to its enduring power. Unlike many historical tragedies, the Montreville recipe offers no closure, no definitive scientific explanation, and no universally accepted moral. Its ambiguity ensures that every retelling provokes debate, speculation, and reflection. Audiences are compelled to question not only the historical events but their own responses. Would they dare prepare it, witness it, or investigate it? By bridging history, psychology, chemistry, and mythology, the story becomes both a cautionary tale and a living mystery, an enigma that challenges reason while feeding curiosity. Ultimately, the recipe's power lies in this intersection of fact, myth, and interpretation. It functions as a mirror, reflecting human fears, desires, and limitations. It tests the boundaries of morality, intellect, and courage, inviting both scholars and laypeople to ponder. Does true danger reside in the substance itself, in the mind, or in the human drive to uncover forbidden knowledge? Every theory, every account, every legend adds weight to the narrative, yet no single explanation suffices. The Montreville recipe remains, after centuries, an unsolved puzzle, a chilling testament to the consequences of curiosity, the potency of myth, and the enduring human struggle to understand the unknown. In examining the various theories and myths, one observes the delicate balance between skepticism and belief. Chemical experiments, eyewitness testimonies, and folkloric traditions all intersect to form a complex tapestry, illustrating that reality is neither purely objective nor entirely imagined. The recipe's legend persists because it operates on multiple levels, as an empirical puzzle, a psychological trigger, and a moral allegory. Each perspective enriches understanding while simultaneously deepening mystery, creating a narrative that is both intellectually and emotionally immersive. Even in the present day, Montreville continues to attract historians, chemists, folklorists, and thrill-seekers, each hoping to uncover a piece of the enigma. Guided tours, archived manuscripts, and local storytellers keep the legend alive, offering both caution and fascination. Scholars debate whether the recipe's effects were chemical, psychological, supernatural, or all three. Locals recount personal anecdotes of shadows, voices, and inexplicable sensations, and visitors leave pondering the line between history and myth. The story refuses closure, ensuring that curiosity and dread remain intertwined in a perpetually unresolved narrative. Through the lens of theories and myths, the Montreville recipe transcends its literal ingredients. It becomes a symbol of human temptation, a test of morality, and a reflection of the boundaries between knowledge and obsession. Its story challenges audiences to confront not only the events themselves, but also the larger questions they pose. Can evil exist independently, or is it a construct of human perception? Do forbidden acts carry inherent risk, or is the danger primarily psychological? And ultimately, what does it mean to survive or witness the consequences of human curiosity pushed to its extremes? The forbidden recipe of Montreville remains one of history's most enduring enigmas, a riddle woven from tragedy, fear, and human fascination. Despite centuries of investigation, experimentation, and speculation, its true nature continues to elude comprehension. Each retelling of that fateful night sparks equal parts dread and curiosity, a reminder that some secrets, once uncovered, may carry consequences far beyond imagination. Montreville itself has become a shrine to uncertainty. Streets echo with whispered accounts. Centuries-old manuscripts preserve fragmented knowledge, and locals still speak of shadows that move when no one watches, and scents that appear unbidden, reminiscent of a long-lost meal. Every artifact, diary, and anecdote contributes to the mythos, yet no single account provides clarity. Scholars, skeptics, and folklorists remain divided. Was the recipe a chemical hazard, a psychological trigger, or a conduit for supernatural forces? Some argue that human obsession with forbidden knowledge, an innate drive to understand and control, amplified the dangers, turning mere ingredients into instruments of catastrophe. Others maintain that fear, suggestion, and collective imagination forged a narrative so potent it imposed itself on reality, a story capable of shaping minds, bodies, and events alike. Perhaps it is both. A perfect storm of human curiosity and misfortune, scientific ignorance and mythic terror, colliding with deadly precision. The moral questions linger like smoke in a dimly lit room. What are the boundaries of human inquiry? At what point does the pursuit of knowledge become hubris? And if one were to uncover such forbidden knowledge today, would it illuminate truth or unleash consequences beyond comprehension? History offers no clear answer, only fragmented accounts and the lingering weight of what might have been. Every hypothesis is met with counter-arguments. Every survivor's story introduces doubt. The recipe's legend persists not only because of what it did, but because of what it represents. A mirror of human curiosity, fear, and ambition, reflecting both our brilliance and our vulnerability. As we ponder these events, the story casts a shadow on the choices we make, urging reflection on the cost of curiosity. Would you dare to seek the forbidden, even knowing the price could be life itself? Would you trust reason over rumor, science over superstition, or instinct over fear? And if you failed, Would your experience vanish into obscurity or become the next thread in the tapestry of Montreville's cursed lore? The line between observer and participant is thin, and history shows that even the most cautious can become entwined in forces beyond their control. Perhaps the truth perished with the victims, their lives extinguished in a single night, leaving only whispers and speculation behind. Or perhaps it persists somewhere, hidden yet potent, waiting for the next daring soul willing to probe the boundaries of the unknown. The Montreville recipe is more than a story. It is a testament to the perilous allure of forbidden knowledge, a chilling reminder that some mysteries may be too dangerous to explore, yet impossible to resist.